I don't talk about what I found in the Shoshone backcountry anymore. People hear the words thermal pool, and they think of something they've seen on a nature documentary. Pretty colors, a lazy column of steam, tourists 10 feet back behind a rope. They don't picture what I found in the late September backcountry off the Snake River Plateau in 2019. And I've stopped trying to explain it because the look I get from people who haven't done this work, the careful, patient look that says they've decided I've been alone in the field too long, is worse than silence. I want to be specific about my background before anything else, because the specificity matters. I'd been a backcountry thermal monitoring technician for 11 years by the time this happened. Not seasonal, not a contractor brought in to collect samples and leave. 11 years of walking the park's active hydrothermal zones with instruments and field notebooks, logging temperatures and gas concentrations and changes in the behavior of features that most visitors never get within 2 miles of. I knew how thermal ground looked when it was building toward a new vent. I knew the smell profile of a hydrogen sulfide release before it was visible. I knew what active ground sounded like when you pressed your ear to the soil and heard the water moving 40 feet below you through pressurized channels. I knew what pools were supposed to look like, to smell like, to behave like. That knowledge is the only reason I can say with any confidence that what I found that morning did not belong to any category I had spent 11 years learning. The Shoshone Plateau section sits south of the main visitor corridors, accessible only by multi-day backcountry routes and by the patrol roads that the geology teams use for instrument access. In late September, it is empty in the full sense of the word. The seasonal hikers are gone. The weather is moving toward cold. The landscape settles into a quiet that feels, even after years of field work there, faintly hostile to prolonged human presence. I was on a 3-day solo monitoring circuit, checking 4 instrument stations and collecting water samples from a cluster of hydrothermal features that the park's geological database had been tracking for 6 years. Routine work. Work I'd done a dozen times on that exact route. I came around the eastern arm of a ridgeline at around 8 in the morning and stopped walking. The stopping was not a decision. Wasn't it was the same kind of involuntary brake that your body applies when something in the visual field registers as wrong before the mind has assembled the language for it. There was a pool in the hollow below me that was not in the database. I knew the database for that sector the way a cartographer knows a coastline. Every mapped feature, every surveyed coordinate, every historical note about features that had opened and closed over the preceding decades. This pool was not in it. My first instinct was professional. New features open. The thermal plumbing beneath Yellowstone is not static. Pressure shifts, channels redirect, vents that were sealed for decades can reactivate. I had logged anomalous new features before. I reached for my notebook and started down the slope toward it, and I stopped about 20 yards out because the ground was wrong in a way that took me a moment to name. The pool was steaming, a steady low column lifting off the surface in the cool morning air, which meant it was hot. A hot pool in a thermal area develops a kill zone around it. The acidic, mineral-laden water that seeps into the surrounding soil bleaches the earth to white and pale gray, kills the vegetation in a ring that can extend 30 feet or more from the water's edge, deposits mineral crust on every surface it touches. The kill zone is a visible record of how long the feature has been active, the same way rings in a tree trunk record years. You can read it. You can read age and intensity and the direction the water moves underground by the pattern of that bleached earth. The pool was sitting in green grass, not edge of the kill zone green, not surviving at the margins green. Lush, healthy, mid-September green, pressed right up to the water's edge as though someone had set a basin down in a meadow that morning. The steam was rising from water that showed no ground-level evidence of having ever been there. I walked to the edge slowly. The pool was approximately 18 feet across, roughly oval. The color of the water was not the turquoise or pale blue of most high-temperature thermal features. It was dark, a deep, almost opaque darkness that deepened rapidly from the edges inward, darkening past navy, past indigo, past any color I had a name for, into a quality of depth that I felt more than saw. In 11 years of looking into thermal pools, I had developed a working sense of scale, of what different depths looked like from above. This pool did not look like water with a bottom. It looked like an opening in the earth with water in it. The difference being one of orientation, of what the eye expects to find, and how far down it expects to find it. The surface was still. That was the thing I could not move past when I tried later to reconstruct the morning rationally. Thermal pools move. The heat that drives them comes from below, from water at pressure and temperature, and that heat drives constant convection through the column. Even the most placid-looking feature shows motion if you watch it long enough. Upwelling, the slow rotation of water over a vent, the subtle shimmer at the surface that betrays everything moving underneath. I watched this pool for what I later estimated was 4 or 5 minutes. The surface did not move, and it was flat as a mirror and dark as one too, reflecting the gray September sky above me without distortion, without the slightest tremor. I knelt at the edge. The ground under my knees was cool and completely ordinary. No heat radiating from the soil, no warmth from below. Whatever was in that pool was not heating the earth around it. I looked into it. And I want to be careful here, because this is the part that I have rehearsed and re-rehearsed internally, trying to find the rational architecture of it. At a depth that I cannot quantify, not because the water was murky, but because the scale of it defeated my attempts to assign a number. There was something. I want to be precise. It was not an animal. It was not a shape I had a name for. It was a darkness within the darkness, and it was oriented, and it had a direction, and it was moving. Not toward me, not ascending, moving across its own depth with a slow, wide, horizontal motion. The way something moves when the space it occupies is just large enough to contain it, and it has been moving in that space for a very long time. I stood up. I took 3 steps back before I realized I was moving. My hands were shaking when I reached for the radio. I reported the coordinates using the standard anomalous feature protocol, kept my voice level, used the professional language I had spent 11 years developing for exactly this kind of situation. A week later, a colleague went to the coordinates. She found a meadow. Green grass, no thermal activity, no mineral staining, no disturbance. She sent me a photograph. It was just a meadow. I've been back to that sector 3 times since. I check the hollow every time. There is nothing there. The grass grows green and ordinary. The September light falls on it the same as everywhere else. But I think about the stillness. The thing I keep coming back to, lying awake in the specific dark of a field tent at 3 in the morning, is the stillness of that surface. Every thermal pool I have ever stood beside was moving. Everything that is driven by heat from below moves. And that pool was not moving. It was still the way a window is still. The way a threshold is still. The stillness of something that is not a container, but a passage. I still do the circuit. I still log the coordinates every time I pass through. The database has no record of a pool in that hollow. As far as the official record is concerned, there was never anything there. I am the only record of it that exists. And whatever was moving at the bottom of that pool is the only thing that knows I was there. People who study large ungulate behavior in Yellowstone develop a specific skill over time that does not show up in any graduate program curriculum. The skill is reading collective attention. A herd of 500 bison is not 500 individual animals making individual decisions. It is a single distributed organism with 500 sets of sensory inputs. And the information those inputs gather is processed collectively, in real time, in a way that produces herd-wide responses to stimuli that no individual animal could detect alone. You learn to read the herd the way you learn to read a barometer. The surface behavior tells you what the atmosphere below it is doing. I'd been studying bison behavior in Yellowstone for 9 years by the summer of 2021. I want to be specific about what that means in terms of knowledge. I could identify individual animals within the main Lamar Valley herds by conformation, by behavior, by the subtle differentials in their social positioning within the group. I knew the herd's daily movement patterns in every season. I knew which sections of the valley they used for calving and which they avoided during wolf activity. I knew what alarm looked like at every level of intensity, from the faint ear swivel of low-grade alertness to the ground-shaking full herd stampede. I knew what calm looked like. And I knew the difference between the two with a specificity that 9 years in the field buys you. What I saw on the night of July the 14th had no place in either category. I was working a nocturnal observation shift in the central Lamar, parked at a pullout above a section of valley floor where a herd of roughly 300 animals had settled for the night. I was running thermal imaging, the standard kit for nighttime wildlife observation. A scope that resolves heat signatures at significant distances and renders warm-bodied animals as bright shapes against the cooler background. The herd was bedded in the pattern they typically use on summer nights. A loose aggregation across several hundred meters of valley floor, the bulls on the perimeter, the cows and calves clustered in the interior. Normal. I had documented this configuration on dozens of nights. At approximately 1:15 in the morning, I noticed the outlier. It was north of the herd, maybe 25 yards from the nearest animals, moving in a slow loop along the outside of the bedded group. Through the thermal scope, it registered as a heat signature, a warm-bodied organism producing body heat consistent with a large mammal. It was upright, continuously, smoothly upright, moving on 2 legs with a fluid, ground-covering pace that did not waver. Not a bear. Bears walk upright in brief episodes, for specific purposes, and they do not move with that kind of sustained efficiency. This figure moved the way something moves when bipedal locomotion is its natural and preferred state. Smooth, unhurried, covering ground. It was walking the perimeter of the herd, not approaching, not angling toward any individual animal, just walking the circuit, maintaining a consistent distance from the nearest bison, moving with a deliberateness that I could not reconcile with any behavior I had a framework for. I watched it complete 1 full circuit. Then it began a second. Same path, same pace, same 25-yard buffer. And the herd was calm. 300 bison, including cows with calves born less than 2 months prior, and not one animal was on its feet. The bulls on the perimeter nearest to the figure had their heads up and their eyes open. They were tracking it. I could see that they were tracking it. But their bodies showed no tension, no alarm, no preparation for response. The posture of animals that are aware of something nearby and have made the assessment that it does not require a reaction. I have watched wolves work the perimeter of a bison herd at 200 yards and seen animals 300 meters away register the disturbance. And I have watched a single grizzly at half a mile trigger a ripple of alertness that moved through a herd in seconds. Whatever was walking 25 yards from 300 bison at 1 in the morning was not registering as a threat. I watched the figure for 2 hours and 40 minutes. It completed 6 circuits. The pace never varied. The distance never changed. The herd never rose. When the figure finished its 6th circuit, It turned away from the herd and then walked directly toward the eastern ridge. Uphill, into terrain that at 2 in the morning would have been essentially unnavigable for a human being without light. No light was visible. The thermal signature diminished with distance and eventually dropped below the scope's resolution somewhere on the ridge face. I sat in the truck until the sky began to lighten. I did not call it in. What would I have reported? Something was walking around the bison, and the bison didn't mind. I've told 2 colleagues. The first suggested a ranger or a researcher working without lights for some purpose I couldn't guess at, which is possible except for the bison's reaction, or the complete absence of a reaction, which is the thing that no explanation accounts for. Bison do not accept unknown bipeds at 25 yards in the dark during calving season. They do not. That reaction, that absence of alarm, is more impossible to explain than the figure itself. The second colleague listened quietly, and then said nothing for a while, and then said she'd had a report from a seasonal the previous summer that she hadn't included in any official record about something walking at the edge of a herd near Slough Creek on a June night. She said it with the careful voice of someone sharing information they've been holding for a while. Whatever is walking with the bison in the Lamar Valley at night has been doing it long enough that 300 prey animals with newborn calves have decided it belongs to their world. You don't earn that from bison in 1 season. You don't earn it in 5. You earn it over time so long that the animals have stopped categorizing your presence as anything other than a feature of the nights in this valley. A fixture, a given, something as constant and as unthreatening as the river or the dark. I still run nocturnal observation shifts. I still watch the thermals. I still see it some nights, moving at the herd's edge with that same unhurried purpose. And I still don't know what it is. But I know what 300 bison have decided about it. And their judgment, after 9 years of watching them make survival decisions with their lives on the line, is not something I'm inclined to question. There are things that happen on night shift that don't go in the official log. Not because you are hiding them, not because you doubt your own perceptions, but because the official log was designed to hold a specific kind of information. And certain things that happen between midnight and 6 in the morning in the communications room at the Beckler Backcountry Station do not fit inside the categories that the log was built for. What I heard on the evening of November 2nd, 2020 was not equipment noise. It was not static shaped by a tired brain into pattern. I am a careful person. I have spent 8 years in technical communications work. I know what radio interference sounds like. I know what a bounce signal sounds like. I know all the ways that empty channels produce sound that almost resembles language. And I'm telling you that what came through that frequency was none of those things. The Beckler station is in the park's southwest corner, accessed from the Idaho side. Remote even by Yellowstone standards. The fall communication schedule runs through October 15th, after which the backcountry frequencies are considered inactive. No one posted. No one monitoring. The station itself is locked and winterized. By the 1st of November, the district is empty in the full operational sense. I was at the main communications desk at Flag Ranch that night, running the overnight monitoring shift, which is exactly as quiet as it sounds. Dead frequencies, logged weather data, the occasional check-in from highway patrol on adjacent channels. I had been at the desk for 5 hours. The signal came through at 11:47 p.m. It's on the Beckler secondary channel. I recognized the channel immediately because I had set up its monitoring protocol myself 2 years prior. It was not a channel I expected to receive anything on. What came through was a voice. A woman's voice, clear and close, with none of the degradation of distance or interference. She was talking to someone. Not to a base station, not reading a log entry, not making a check-in transmission, talking the way people talk when they are in the middle of a conversation, as if I had joined something already in progress. I could make out perhaps half of what she said. The words I could resolve were ordinary. Trail condition words, weather words, a name spoken with the casual familiarity of someone addressing a companion. I wrote down what I could in the log, then stopped and sat for a moment, and then crossed it out, and then sat for a longer moment. The voice transmitted for 40 seconds. Then the channel returned to its empty hiss. I reported it as an anomalous signal, possible bleed from a civilian frequency. My supervisor ran a standard check. Nothing. No record of any authorized transmission on that channel. No civilian frequency overlap in the relevant band. The Beckler station was confirmed secured. The radio unit confirmed powered down. The building confirmed padlocked. 2 weeks later, I was transferred to a different shift in a different district, and no one brought it up again. But I went back through the historical assignment records on my own time and found the ranger who had been posted at the Beckler Backcountry Station 15 years before my tenure. She'd been assigned there for 4 consecutive seasons. And in the notes from her 4th season, there was a flag, not a formal incident report, just a supervisor's note, about an event on the Beckler Creek Trail near the end of her last posting. She'd gone out alone on a late October survey and hadn't returned on schedule. They'd found her the following morning, a mile and a half off the trail, uninjured, with no memory of the previous 11 hours and no explanation she was willing to commit to paper. She transferred out after that season and, according to the records, never returned to the Beckler district. I don't know whose voice I heard on that channel. I can't know. But it was a woman's voice, and it was using trail condition language and weather language and a name spoken with comfort and familiarity. And the only person who had ever been posted to that station long enough to speak about it that way had left the district 15 years before the night I heard it. The frequency is quiet now. I monitor it from habit more than expectation. But I turn the volume up when I pass it in the scan rotation, just for a second, just long enough to make sure I haven't missed anything. And every time it comes back empty, I feel something that I think is relief, but that I'm not entirely sure isn't disappointment. Like I'm waiting for the rest of the conversation. Like whatever was in the middle of it when I tuned in has something left to say. 8 years of backcountry patrol work teaches you that wilderness trails are social. Not in the human sense, but in the ecological sense. A trail is a record of use. Animals use them. And they leave the evidence, tracks in soft ground, scat along the margins, game trails crossing at angles that tell you which species are moving in which direction and when. A ranger who has walked a trail enough times can read all of that the way you read text. The trail is always saying something. What it says on the morning I'm describing is the reason I haven't walked that section of the thoroughfare route in 3 years. I was doing a late-season trail closure patrol, the kind of work you do in October when the backcountry is emptying out and you're covering ground to document conditions before winter closes access. Solo patrol, 2-day circuit, heavy pack. The route took me up the south boundary trail through a section of mixed conifer and open meadow, climbing toward the plateau. I'd walked this section 6 or 7 times. I knew it, and I started noticing the tracks at mile 4. Not unusual in themselves, large carnivore tracks in soft trail substrate are common out there. Grizzly most often, mountain lion occasionally. What was unusual was the positioning. The tracks were in the center of the trail, laid down in a walking pattern, and they were following mine. Not preceding me, following. Laid on top of my fresh boot prints in some cases, in the places where the soil was soft enough to show the sequence. Whatever had made them had come behind me, was walking where I had walked, in the same direction I was traveling. I stopped and looked back. The trail was empty as far as I could see. I turned around and studied the tracks more carefully. They were large, wider across the pad than any bear track I had logged in 8 years, which is notable because I had logged significant grizzly tracks in that time. The digit impressions were clear, claws, but positioned differently from the bear tracks I knew. Further back from the digit pads, more curved. I photographed them and noted the coordinates and continued walking, watching the trail behind me more than the trail ahead. The tracks continued to appear for the next 3 miles. They were always fresh when I found them, always behind my own prints, always in the center of the trail. I never heard anything. That is the thing that does not fit inside any framework I can construct. The complete silence behind me. A large animal moving through that terrain would produce sound. Brush contact, ground compression, the occasional crack of a stick. I heard nothing, and the trail behind me was silent every time I stopped and listened. But when I started walking again and covered another 100 yards, the tracks were there. At mile 7, the trail crossed a section of exposed bedrock that ran for about 40 meters. No substrate, no tracks possible. I crossed it and stopped on the far side and looked back across the rock. Nothing moved. I waited for 5 minutes. Nothing crossed the rock behind me. I turned around and walked on. 50 yards past the rock, on the soft trail surface again, the tracks resumed. Behind mine, following. I made camp that night with my back to a cliff face and a clear view in every direction and did not sleep well. In the morning, I packed quickly and completed my circuit and did not stop to look at the trail behind me for the last 12 miles. Not because I was certain the tracks would be there. Because I was afraid they wouldn't be. And that would mean whatever had been following me had stopped, which felt worse than the following. The photographs are in my field records. A colleague who reviewed them said the morphology was interesting, that he'd like to cast them if I went back. I have not been back. I didn't tell him the part about the tracks appearing behind me, fresh, without sound. Crossing ground I had just stood on and seen nothing cross. There is a thing that follows people on that trail. I don't know what it is. I know it is large and silent and patient, and that it walks where you walk and stops where you stop, and does not appear to need you to see it. It is content to track and content to follow at whatever distance keeps it invisible and audible only as an absence where sound should be. And the trail says nothing about it. The trail just shows the prints. Yours first, then something else's, then yours again, going on ahead into the back country while something behind you continues to place its feet exactly where you placed yours. Wildlife biology teaches you a particular kind of epistemic discipline. The discipline of not seeing what you want to see, not imposing patterns on behavior that the data don't support. You collect observations, and you let the observations tell you what they tell you. And you hold your interpretations loosely, and you verify and you replicate before you commit to any conclusion. Our 15 years of ungulate fieldwork in Yellowstone had given me that discipline so thoroughly that it had become instinctive. I applied it to everything I observed. I applied it to what I saw in the Hayden Valley in August of 2022 for as long as I could, which was approximately 10 minutes, after which the discipline ran out and I was just a person standing in a meadow who did not know what they were looking at. The Hayden Valley elk population is one of the most documented in the world. I say that not as a boast, but as context, because what I'm about to describe happened in front of a researcher with 15 years of data on this specific population. In a section of their range I had surveyed on foot more times than I could count, and it still did not fit inside any behavioral model I had ever been taught or developed or observed evidence for. It was mid-morning, overcast, light wind from the northwest. I was doing a standard population survey transect, counting animals and recording GPS positions. The valley was active. Elk dispersed across the meadow and creek bottom in the loose configurations of a summer morning. I had counted 41 animals in the first 2 hours of the survey. I came around a stand of willows at the creek margin and found 23 of them standing in a ring, a perfect ring. That is not imprecise language. I used a rangefinder to check distances between adjacent animals from my observation point. The spacing was consistent to within a meter across the full circumference. The ring was approximately 35 meters in diameter, or 23 elk, cows, and adolescents standing at equal intervals around a circle, their bodies oriented inward, their heads lowered, facing the center of their formation. They were not moving. They were not grazing. They were not alert to predators. They were standing with the concentrated, inward stillness of animals, attending to something in the center of the ring that I could not see. The center was empty. Just valley grass, bending slightly in the wind, showing no feature or object that distinguished it from the surrounding meadow. I watched them through the scope for 14 minutes. I have the timestamp in my field notebook, 10:22 to 10:36. Not one animal shifted its weight. Not one flicked an ear or turned its head, unless they stood with a quality of collective stillness that I have not observed in any other circumstance in 15 years of field work. Including animals standing in snow, including animals waiting out predator presence. This was not the stillness of watchful waiting. It was the stillness of deep focus. They broke at 10:36, all 23 simultaneously, in the same half-second, with the casual, unhurried movement of animals resuming normal activity after a pause. Not alarmed, not startled, simply finished. They dispersed into the meadow and began grazing as though nothing had happened. I walked to the center of the ring. The grass was compressed where each animal had stood. The circle was visible from within it, a ring of tamped grass with an undisturbed interior, on the same vegetative pattern you would get from a livestock holding pen or a deliberate enclosure. The center was untouched. I pressed my palm to the grass at the center and held it there. The ground was warmer than the surrounding meadow. Not dramatically, not the obvious heat of a thermal feature. I estimated 15 to 20 degrees differential, which in August in the Hayden Valley, after a cloudy morning with no direct sun exposure, is not a differential that has an obvious meteorological explanation. I held my palm there for 2 minutes. The warmth did not diminish. I filed an observation report. Unusual aggregation behavior, Hayden Valley, 23 individuals, circular formation, approximately 14 minutes duration. I described the formation in the neutral language of field observation. I did not describe the warmth. I did not describe the quality of the stillness. I did not describe the feeling that standing in that empty center produced, the feeling of being in a place that had just been vacated by a significance I did not have instruments to measure. A colleague reviewed the report and asked if I thought it might be thermoregulatory behavior, animals orienting together for warmth. I said possibly. We both knew it wasn't. She knew I knew. We moved on. The warm ground is what I think about, because the elk had not been standing in the center. Whatever warmth was there came from below, or from whatever had occupied that space before I arrived, or from something I don't have a category for. And 23 wild elk had stood in a perfect ring around it for 14 minutes and then walked away, satisfied, complete, as though whatever they had come to attend to had concluded exactly as it was supposed to. Maintenance work at Norris Geyser Basin is not the same as maintenance work anywhere else in the park, Norris is the hottest and most dynamic of Yellowstone's thermal basins, a landscape of bleached silica and boiling mud and steam vents that change month to month. The ground is not stable in the way that most surfaces described by that word are stable. It is a thin crust of mineralized silica over a system of superheated water and pressurized gas. The boardwalk runs above it on concrete piers, 3 feet of air between the planks and the thermal surface. My job takes me onto that boardwalk after hours in the dark, when the basin is empty and the geysers are erupting for nobody, and the steam is thick enough some nights to reduce visibility to 15 feet. I've been doing night maintenance at Norris for 7 years. I say that because what I'm describing needs to be understood inside that context. Not a visitor, not someone experiencing the basin's otherness for the first time. Someone who knows its sounds and smells and the specific quality of its night silence well enough to notice when something in it changes. The knocking started in March of 2021. I was alone on the boardwalk near the back basin, heading toward a drainage access point that had been flagged for inspection. The night was cold, below freezing, the steam generating a heavy fog over the basin that the boardwalk lights barely penetrated. I was walking at a normal pace, and I heard, from directly below my feet, a single sharp knock. Metallic, clear, immediate. The kind of sound that a tool makes striking a pipe. I stopped. The knock did not repeat. I stood for about 30 seconds listening, and the basin returned its ordinary sounds to me. The hiss of steam and the distant percussion of a geyser somewhere in the fog. And nothing else. I continued walking. After 3 steps, the knock came again. Below me, below the exact plank my left foot had just contacted. 1 knock. I stopped again. Silence. Walked. Knock. I want to be as precise as I can about the sequencing that followed because the precision is the thing that mattered. The knocking corresponded to my footsteps, not with a delay, not preceding them, simultaneously. 1 step, 1 knock, directly below whatever foot I had just placed. When I stopped, it stopped. When I walked faster, the knocking accelerated. When I slowed, it slowed. I tried stopping mid-step, my weight partially transferred, and the knock produced itself at exactly that moment, before my foot fully settled. As though whatever was producing the sound knew the position of my foot, not just the impact of my weight. I spent 20 minutes conducting informal tests, irregular rhythms, random stops, backtracking. In every case, the knocking tracked my position on the boardwalk with a precision that could not be attributed to resonance or vibration or any acoustic property of the structure. It was responsive. Whatever was beneath the boardwalk was responding to me in real time with a one-to-one correspondence that required awareness of where I was and what I was doing. I got off the boardwalk onto the asphalt maintenance path. The knocking stopped. I stepped back onto the boardwalk. It resumed. I finished the inspection and walked back to the service building and wrote up the maintenance log and did not mention it. I have not mentioned it in any official capacity. I have mentioned it to one colleague, a woman who has worked the basin longer than I have, who listened and said she had heard it too, and had been hearing it intermittently for years, and had never included it in any report because there is no category in any maintenance form for something below the boardwalk that knocks back when you walk over it. She said she thought it meant no harm. She said that in the way that people say things, they have decided to believe because the alternatives are less useful. I am not sure harm is even a relevant frame. Whatever is beneath that boardwalk is not aggressive, and it is not retreating. It is present. It is responsive. It is conducting in its own medium under 2 feet of mineralized silica and pressurized thermal water. A conversation of sorts with the people who walk above it. Knock for knock, step for step, And the only thing I'm certain of is that it has been doing this for longer than the boardwalk has been there, and that it will keep doing it long after the boardwalk is gone. The knocking is not a message. It is a practice, something exercising the only communication available to it across the boundary of the thermal crust, reminding us, one footstep at a time, that the crust is not a floor, that we are walking on a surface, that something below it knows we are there. I've studied wolf pack dynamics in Yellowstone for 12 years, and I want to be direct about what that means before I describe what I observed in January of 2022. I know individual wolves. I know their markings and their behavioral signatures and their position in the social hierarchy and their history within their pack. I have watched wolves hunt and kill and defend territory and raise young and die. I have logged more hours of direct wolf observation than almost anyone alive. I say this not to establish credentials, but to explain why the behavior I'm about to describe was so immediately and completely wrong. I knew what normal looked like for these animals. I knew it the way you know the voice of someone you've spoken to every day for 12 years. And what happened on that January afternoon was as unmistakably abnormal as a familiar voice suddenly producing words in a language you've never heard it use. The Wapiti Lake Pack was denning in the Mirror Plateau region and using the southern Hayden Valley for winter hunting. I was observing from a ridge above the valley at about 2 in the afternoon. Poor light, the flat gray of a January overcast. The pack visible through the spotting scope as dark shapes on the snow-covered valley floor. 8 animals in the loose, relaxed configuration of a pack at rest between hunts. I'd been watching them for 3 hours. Routine. They were doing what wolves mostly do, which is nothing, in the purposeful way that wolves do nothing between bursts of explosive activity. The alpha male stood up. His body language was the first wrongness, not the controlled, purposeful posture of a wolf initiating a hunt or a patrol. His legs were slightly spread, his head lower than normal, and he was facing the tree line to the west with a quality of attention that I had never seen from him in 4 years of observations. I want to be precise about this because it matters. I had watched this animal face down grizzly bears. I had watched him charge rival wolves. His body language in those situations was aggressive, forward-leaning, deliberate. What I was seeing was different. The set of his shoulders was wrong. His tail was at a position I associated with the back half of the submission to alarm spectrum, a position I had logged in observations of wolves encountering something they perceived as dangerous and unknown. Within 10 seconds, the entire pack was on its feet. All 8 animals, simultaneously, each showing the same wrong body language the alpha had displayed. They were all facing the tree line. Nothing was visible at the tree line. I had clear sight lines across the valley, and there was nothing at the tree line. They ran. Not a hunting run, not a territorial run. The kind of run that animals do when something has bypassed every threshold of threat assessment and produced a single overriding signal. They ran as a single body, shoulder to shoulder, northeast across the valley floor. And they ran at a speed I had never seen from this pack. I tracked them across the valley. They covered 2 miles in approximately 6 minutes. They stopped at the creek drainage in the northeast and turned around, all 8 of them, and stood facing back toward the tree line, back toward wherever they had been. And when they stood like that, I scanned the tree line for 40 minutes. Nothing emerged from it. Nothing moved at it. No tracks were visible in the snow at the margin of the trees from my vantage, though I could not be certain at that distance. The snow across the section of valley floor the pack had just vacated was empty and unbroken, except for their own trail out. The pack did not return to that section of the valley for 4 days. I have GPS collar data showing their avoidance, a 4-kilometer displacement from their established range. maintained consistently for 96 hours. When they returned, they approached from the east with a spread formation that is characteristic of wolves entering contested territory. They moved cautiously. They tested the area with extended low-intensity scenting behavior. He's covering every meter of the section they had abandoned, the way a pack reclaims ground after a rival has been through it. Whatever had been at that tree line had scent. It had presence. It was real in the ways that matter to wolves, which is to say in every way that matters. 12 years of wolf research, and I could not identify it. The official wildlife monitoring data for that section of the park on that date shows no large carnivore activity, no grizzly, no rival pack, no human. The cameras at the tree line showed nothing. I still watch the Wapiti Lake pack. They use that section of valley again now. They've reclaimed it. But on certain evenings, usually in low light, usually in the flat gray of a January afternoon, I watch the alpha male and I see him stop sometimes and face the tree line to the west, with his head down and his tail at that position I associate with the back half of the alarm spectrum. And then he moves on, and the pack follows, and the valley is ordinary again. But he still checks. Every time, he still checks the tree line. The Two Ocean Plateau Patrol Cabin is one of 6 unmanned backcountry structures in Yellowstone's remote southeast quadrant. It sits in a high basin above the plateau, accessible by a 3-day route from the nearest trailhead, and it serves as a waypoint for the seasonal backcountry rangers who patrol that section of the park's interior. It is not a comfortable structure. The winters are severe and the elevation makes the summers short. The basin it sits in has a quality that even experienced backcountry personnel describe as oppressive. A particular atmospheric heaviness that you feel in the first hour and either acclimatize to or don't. I've been a district ranger in the park's southeast quadrant for 7 years. I know the Two Ocean Cabin. I know the route. I know the particular challenges of managing a section of park that is 3 days from any road and that receives perhaps 50 permit holders per season. In September of 2022, I led a 2-person inspection team to the cabin as part of the fall closure protocol. We reached it on the second afternoon and found it in a condition that the closure protocol did not account for. The cabin was occupied, not occupied in the sense of a presence we could identify, occupied in the sense of a space that is being lived in, and the stove had fresh ash. The bunk had been slept in, the blanket folded back in the way someone folds it at the beginning of a day. On the table there was a tin cup, cleaned and inverted to dry. On the shelf beside it, 3 items arranged with the precise economy of someone who has learned to maintain order in a small space. A folded map, a weathered field notebook, a folded bandana. I picked up the field notebook. It was 3/4 full. The entries began in May and continued through the date of our arrival, daily, in a small and consistent hand. Standard field notation, weather observations, wildlife sightings, trail condition notes. The entries were accurate. I verified them later against monitoring data and permit records. Every bear sighting was in a location where a collared bear had been logged on the corresponding date, and every unusual weather event matched the automated station data. The notebook was not fabricated. It was a real record of 3.5 months of backcountry work. No one had been assigned to that cabin. No permit had been issued for extended occupation. No ranger, seasonal or permanent, had any record of working that sector in 2022. The notebook belonged to someone who had been living and working in the Two Ocean Basin for the summer with the quiet competence of a person to whom this was ordinary. Not a trespasser, not a squatter. A ranger doing ranger work in a cabin they had no authorization to be in. We searched the area for 2 hours. No equipment cached outside, no food stores, no personal items beyond what was on the shelf. Whatever person had been living there had departed recently. leaving a space as tidy as a closing protocol requires, as if they had been doing it at the end of every season for many seasons. I brought the notebook back. It's in a file in my office. I take it out occasionally and read through it, looking for something I might have missed the first time. The handwriting is even and unhurried throughout. The observations are thorough and accurate. There is no indication in the text itself of who wrote it, or why they were there, or where they went when we arrived. The last entry is dated the afternoon before our inspection. It reads, "Conditions nominal. Ridge patrol complete. Basin quiet." That's it. No farewell, no explanation. Conditions nominal, as though the next entry would follow in the morning. As though the writer had simply paused and would be back to complete the record. The cabin was empty when we left. I padlocked it myself and logged the new combination. The following spring, a seasonal ranger opened it for the first time and found it exactly as I had left it. The tin cup was on the shelf where I had replaced it. The blanket was folded on the bunk. The stove was cold, but the field notebook was gone. Eight years of thermal field work in Yellowstone teaches you that your nose is an instrument. Not a metaphorical instrument, a literal one. The hydrogen sulfide concentrations that the thermal areas produce exist on a spectrum that an experienced field technician learns to read with a specificity that surprises people who have not done the work. You can distinguish between the baseline sulfur output of a dormant fumarole and the sharper, a more complex emission profile of a feature that's building toward a new vent event. You can tell the difference between the mineral water smell of an alkaline hot spring and the more organic note that indicates elevated biological material in the water column. You learn these distinctions because they are operationally important. The wrong smell in the wrong place in a thermal area can mean the ground you are standing on is about to fail. What I encountered on the western margin of the Heart Lake thermal area in July of 2021 was not a smell I had encountered before in 8 years of thermal work, which is itself notable. The thermal field produces a wide catalog of odors, and I had accounted for most of them. This was outside the catalog. I was doing a standard survey transect. I'm moving west along the margin of the main thermal complex, toward a cluster of fumaroles that the quarterly monitoring schedule required sampling. The morning was clear. Light wind from the northeast, air temperature around 58. Good conditions. I had already completed 2 sampling stations without incident. The smell arrived with a gust from ahead of me, from the direction of the fumarole cluster. And I want to be precise about what my body did before my mind caught up with it. I stopped walking. My eyes watered. My stomach turned over. I took 2 involuntary steps backward. The physiological response of an animal that has detected something its nervous system considers a threat. This happened before I had consciously processed what I was smelling. What I was smelling was decay, not the trace presence of organic compounds that you sometimes encounter near thermal features where animals have died in the water. Not an ambient note carried from somewhere distant. This was immediate, concentrated, directional, and industrial in its intensity. The full-force decomposition profile of something large and recently dead. I spent half an hour searching for the source. The terrain around the fumarole cluster was open, low relief. If a bison or elk had died anywhere in my visual range, I would have found it, or found evidence of it. Broken ground, ravens, disturbance. I found nothing. The smell was strongest directly downwind of the fumaroles, rising with their steam output, as though it were originating in the vent system itself. I collected the samples, finished the station, and hiked out. I submitted the samples with full field notes, including a detailed description of the odor anomaly. The lab results, which came back 16 days later, showed an elevated volatile organic compound profile in all 3 fumaroles at the cluster. The specific compounds were consistent with advanced biological decomposition, proteins breaking down, lipids in dissolution, the chemistry of something large that had been dead for a significant period, present in the gas output at concentrations that were unambiguous and significantly elevated above baseline for those vents. The problem was physical. The fumarole system at that location descends to depths and temperatures and pH levels that are incompatible with the survival of any biological material. Whatever the chemistry was detecting was not on the surface and had not entered the system through any accessible pathway. It was in the thermal plumbing, at depths where no living organism could exist, decomposing at whatever rate the extreme conditions permitted. Something large, something biological, in a place it could not physically have reached. The follow-up samples 6 weeks later showed the concentrations declining toward baseline. Decomposition concludes. Whatever was in that system finished its dissolution and became chemistry, became part of the output, became something that dissipated into the sky above the thermal basin and left no further record. I have not been back to those fumaroles. I've asked to have the station reassigned. The request was accommodated, but the smell stays with me in the way that very strong sensory experiences stay. Not as a memory I replay voluntarily, as a reflex. On certain mornings in thermal areas, when the wind shifts and carries something complex from a nearby vent, my body stops and my stomach turns before my mind has identified anything. And then I stand there for a moment, waiting, checking, cataloging the odor against the known profiles. And it's always nothing. Sulfur, mineral water, the standard outputs of a system doing what it has always done. Nothing else. I keep telling myself that. I've gotten quite good at it. I've been a backcountry ranger in Yellowstone for 13 years, and I want to tell you something about what that means before I tell you what happened in October of 2023 in the Absaroka foothills above the Lamar Valley. Because context is everything here. Context is the only thing that makes this account worth anything at all. 13 years of this work means I have spent more time alone in Yellowstone's backcountry than most people spend in their entire career. I have navigated that terrain in every season, in conditions ranging from the benign to the genuinely dangerous. I have encountered every large predator the park contains: grizzly bears, black bears, mountain lions, wolves, in circumstances ranging from routine to the kind that require you to understand very quickly what is going to happen next and make a decision. I am not a person who frightens easily in the field. I am not a person given to misidentification of natural phenomena or to the imposition of patterns on random sensory data. I have spent 13 years learning to see this landscape accurately. And I am telling you that what I saw above the Lamar on an October morning in 2023 was not something I could explain then and is not something I can explain now. I was doing a solo patrol of the high country above the valley, checking the late-season trail conditions on a route that runs along the eastern ridge before dropping back down to the valley floor. The morning was cold, below freezing, with a thin crust of snow on the higher ground and good visibility in all directions. I had been walking for 3 hours. I knew the route. I came around a rock buttress at about 9,000 feet, and the figure was on the slope above me. Standing, not moving, facing out across the valley. At first, I took it for a person. The outline was human, upright, proportioned the way a person is proportioned, standing on a flat section of the ridge about 200 yards upslope from my position. I stopped and raised my binoculars. The figure did not move while I focused on it. What I could see through the binoculars was a figure that stood completely still on a section of exposed ridge where the wind was. I could judge by the feel of it on my face, significant. Strong enough that I was bracing against it. The figure was not bracing. It was not moving at all. Not the small, constant adjustments that a standing human being makes against wind and cold, the weight shifts and the postural micro-corrections that the body makes involuntarily to maintain balance and warmth. It was still with the quality of something that does not feel the wind the way that biological organisms feel the wind. I watched it for 15 minutes. It did not move. I began climbing toward it. The route took me on a diagonal across the slope, and for a stretch of about 8 minutes, it was behind the buttress and out of my sight lines. When I came around the rock and had a clear view of the ridge section again, it was gone. The ridge was empty. I climbed to where it had been standing. The snow on that section of rock was undisturbed. No boot prints, no compression marks, no evidence that anything had been standing there. But the rock was warm. A section of exposed stone, maybe 2 meters by 1, facing into the wind on an open ridge at 9,000 feet on an October morning. Warm to the touch in a way that stone exposed to those conditions should not have been. I held my hand on it for a long time. The warmth did not diminish, so I've thought about what I saw every day since. I've run it through every framework I know. Optical effects, misidentification of a rock formation, fatigue, the way the high-altitude light distorts proportionate distance. I have run all of it, seriously, methodically, the way 13 years of careful fieldwork trains you to run alternative explanations. None of them work. None of them account for 15 minutes of continuous observation at reasonable magnification, producing a consistent, detailed, human-shaped figure that was not moving in wind, that was moving everything around it. None of them account for the warm stone. There is something in the high country above the Lamar that stands on ridges and faces out across the valley with the patience of something that has been doing it for a very long time. I don't know what it is. I don't know how long it has been there. I know the valley it watches. I know the herds that move through it and the predators that follow the herds and the seasonal rhythms that make it one of the most complex and alive ecosystems in North America. And I think about what it means that something stands up there and watches all of it. Stands in the wind without moving, leaves warmth in the stone where it stood, and is gone by the time you climb to where it was, as though it has no interest in being found, only in watching. 13 years of this work, and I have never filed an account of it. Until now. Because there are things that happen in this park that the official record was not built to hold. And sometimes the only honest thing you can do is speak them plainly and let them sit in the air, the way the warmth sat in that stone, long after the source of it was gone.